everybody. This is Thomas coming to you again with another transmission from the Gospel of Mark. But first, we're going to shed a little bit light on what we talked about in our previous transmission of proving, scientifically speaking, on the existence of God. And we use the Big Bang because it is a scientific fact. That's what the scientists tell us today. And we spoke of how only a controlled explosion can create life. In other words, a random explosion could never create life. It is scientifically speaking impossible. It's like setting off a stick of dynamite and expecting a bunch of golf balls, all of them, to land in a hole in one. The only way an explosion can create life is that it has to be controlled. That's the only way you can set the Earth at the right distance from the sun. And if the Earth were but a few degrees away from the sun, or closer, especially closer to the sun, it would become so hot all life would cease to exist. It says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been understood and observed by what he made, so that people are without excuse." In other words, the creation itself is a testimony to the existence of God. It's the reason why in John chapter 1, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word," that word in Greek is logos, wisdom. But when John uses it, it means the wisdom of God, or the mind creationist of God, that brings order to the universe. And not only does God bring order to our universe, but he does so in our lives personally. Just read Galatians chapter 5. Read the whole chapter. It talks about sin and the fruits of the Spirit, and God brings morality. So it's not just a creation of the universe, but even in our own moral personal lives, God brings order. Even in the book of Job. Now, Job existed roughly around 3,450 years ago, right around that time. And he said in Job chapter 26, verse 7, it says, "He spreads out the north over empty space, suspending the earth over nothing," as you can see in the picture. And we all know Job never went to the moon. And now, back to Mark chapter 3.
Chapter 3. And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth. And he saith unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it forth, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth, and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. But Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and the great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude, when they had heard what great things he did, came unto him. And he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him, because of the multitude, lest they should throng him. For he had healed many, insomuch that they pressed upon him for to touch him, as many as had plagues and unclean spirits, when they saw him, fell down before him, and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. And he straitly charged them that they should not make him known. And he goeth up into a mountain, and calleth unto him whom he would, and they came unto him. And he ordained 12, that they should be with him, and that he might send them forth to preach, and to have power to heal sickness, and to cast out devils. And Simon he surnamed Peter, and James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James. He surnamed them Boanerges, which is the sons of thunder. And Andrew, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him. And they went into an house.
That was Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 19. And in Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, we see two things. We see Jesus healing, doing good on the Sabbath, and then we see the reaction of the religious people of the day. They were doing evil. They were plotting to kill him because Jesus violated the tradition of the elders, which, as we said before, was an additional 5,000 pages that they added to the Torah. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what side are we going to choose? Whose side are we going to be on? In James chapter 4, verse 17, it says, "Therefore, anyone who knows what is right but fails to do it is guilty of sin." God calls us to follow the example of Jesus and to do good unto others. Are we saving souls or are we losing souls? Now, this man was healed because of his faith and his obedience to Jesus. Jesus said, "Stand and stretch out your hand." The man was obedient. His faith was working in accordance with his deeds. Now, in Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 12, we see that Jesus' fame spread everywhere, that people were coming from southern Israel to the north just to see Jesus, and that's a distance of about 150 kilometers. Now, it says that he went into places like Tyre and Sidon, which is southern Lebanon. And it's a fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 9 that speaks of the Messiah, not just a light for Israel, but even for the Gentiles, a light to the nations. As you can see, Jesus did not allow the demons to speak. He did not allow them to try to expose who he really was, which is the Son of God. Jesus will do that in God's timing, not on some fallen entity like a demon. And in Mark chapter 3, verses 13 through 19, we see that Jesus called apostles. Now, in Luke chapter 6, verse 12, Jesus spent the entire night in prayer. And Jesus picked 12 apostles through whom he would reach the nations with the gospel. In a similar way, when you read the Torah in Numbers chapter 13, we see that Moses sent 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan. And we see some parallels between Jesus and Moses. A fulfillment of Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, where it speaks of a prophet like unto Moses. We're going to stop right here, and we will continue and finish Mark chapter 3. Thank you.
Procediente ignición del mini reactor Magatica FF2001, modo experimental. Preparados para iniciar simulación.
Hello everybody, this is Pastor. We are here again to finish Mark chapter 3. Today we're going to be in verses 20 through 35. Also going to recap on what we had read in the first half of Mark chapter 3. We talked about how Jesus spent an entire night praying to God, and afterwards he chose the 12 apostles, and we spoke of how reminiscent it is of how Moses picked 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan, and how Jesus used 12 apostles to reach the nations with the gospel. And we talked about how that was a fulfillment of Deuteronomy 18, verse 18, that speaks of a prophet like unto Moses. We also saw that Jesus expelled demons, and he did not allow them to speak to expose who he really was, which is the Son of God. Now, in this video that I'm about to show you, kind of sheds light on this topic. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12, it says, "You need to be strong because we are not fighting against human enemies. No, but instead we are fighting against the rulers and the powerful spirits that have authority over this dark world. We are fighting against powerful bad spirits." The demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, Genesis chapter 6. That's what the book of Enoch tells us. The cover-up has been done by the Smithsonians because they embrace the Powell Doctrine, which is a pro-Darwinian evolution. But the Smithsonian does admit to finding the bones of the giants. And now back to Mark verses 20 through 35.
And the multitude cometh together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. And when his friends heard it, they went out to lay hold on him, for they said, He is beside himself. And the scribes which came down from Jerusalem said, He hath Beelzebub, and by the prince of the devils casteth he out devils. And he called them unto him, and said unto them in parables, How can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand, but hath an end. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. Verily I say unto you, all sins shall be forgiven unto the sons of men, and blasphemies wherewithsoever they shall blaspheme. But he that shall blaspheme against the Holy Ghost hath never forgiveness, but is in danger of eternal damnation. Because they said, He hath an unclean spirit. There came then his brethren and his mother, and standing without, sent unto him, calling him. And the multitude sat about him, and they said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren without seek for thee. And he answered them, saying, Who is my mother, O my brethren? And he looked round about on them which sat about him, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother and my sister and mother.
In verses 20 through 21, we see that the family of Jesus said of Jesus that he's out of his mind. You see, initially his family failed to follow him. And this is a parallel even with Moses, because Moses' family initially did not follow him. They did not accept his role. But later on, his brother and sister helped them. And in the same way, Jesus' family initially did not follow him, but later on, his brother James became the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And in Mark chapter 3, verses 22 through 30, we see that Jesus expels a demon. And you could see this more in depth in the Gospel of Luke and Matthew. But the religious leaders could not deny this miracle, so they called Jesus Beelzebub, which means Prince of Demons. It's also the name of a Canaanite god, which you can read about in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 2. Essentially, they were attributing the miracles of God to Satan. And Jesus goes on to explain the blaspheme of the Holy Spirit. You have to remember that only God can save you. So if you set yourself against God, there is no hope for you. And in Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35, Jesus talks about the spiritual family and that the spiritual ties are stronger than the blood ties. So that being said, we are still to honor our father and mother, and we are still to love our family members here on earth. In fact, if you go to John chapter 19, verses 26 through 27, you see that Jesus, in his death, took care of his mother. And the Apostle Paul went on to say in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8 says, if anyone does not take care of his own relatives, especially his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So yes, the spiritual family does take priority, but at the same time, as Christians, we are called to love and take care of our immediate family. That's it for right now. We will continue in Mark chapter 4, which will be our next transmission. Thank you.